And so I wanted to share with you some of the practices that we did on my current project in order to make sure that we delivered value right from the very beginning. A lot of Scrum teams will set aside an iteration 0 to set up things like continuous integration and continuous delivery and integration tests. But we decided that we would go ahead and start by delivering value, and we would get those things built as we needed them. And that really helped us out. I myself am a Pluralsight author, Microsoft MVP, and I work for a company called Improving, based out of Dallas. As a Pluralsight author, I've got some 30-day subscription cards that I like to give out for good, insightful questions. So if you ask questions, then I will try to fling one of these in your direction, and hopefully it'll make it to you. And definitely want to just keep the conversation moving. At Improving, we like to do really exciting things like make little holes with our fingers, like we did yesterday, so that we could capture the shape of the sun inside of the web. We made our own little pinhole cameras. So how many people made it out yesterday to take a look at the eclipse? Oh, awesome. Everyone take advantage of that. Do you know, I'm sure that you've already looked it up, but in 2024, just 7 years from now, we're going to have another total eclipse passing over North America. This time, Dallas is going to be in the path of totality. So come on down. We will make some space for you. But just a few months before that, we're going to have an annular eclipse. Again, Dallas will be in the path of the annular eclipse, but with an annular eclipse, it's never total. It just creates a ring of fire. But definitely looking forward to that. So nice little the thing that happens is also the leaves themselves make their own little pattern, so you can see the little crescents. Of course, these aren't crescents of the moon; they're crescents of the sun. It's amazing. And then otherwise intelligent people will stare at the sun with nothing but their Ray-Bans on and complain later that they can't see. Not sure why that happens, but it was just an amazing sight, something that you hardly ever see, a whole bunch of geeks outside. It was amazing. And of course, we're all on our phones. But that's what we do at Improving. What we did on this project is that we delivered value, and we're going to be showing you how we delivered value as an epic in 3 iterations. So we're going to start with iteration 1, and we're going to deliver branding. That's going to be the value that we show. In iteration 2, we're going to deliver a sitemap, and then in iteration 3, we're going to deliver information architecture. And along the way, we're going to build a continuous delivery pipeline. Now, usually for this talk, I set up that continuous delivery pipeline ahead of time. This time, I'm going to set it up live on stage, so things are probably going to go terribly, terribly wrong. But this is being recorded, so if it does go terribly wrong, then I can put it up on YouTube, and you can all laugh at me over and over again. So we're going to start with branding by building up wireframes and use Azure Web Services to deploy those. And then in iteration 2, in order to deliver the sitemap, we'll use VSTS and Azure Virtual Machines. And then in iteration 3, we're going to use Entity Framework and set up an Azure SQL database. So all of this, we're going to try to set up in an hour. Let's see what we can do. So in order to deliver branding, we're going to start, the value that we're going to be delivering is that we're going to be testing out the color scheme. We're going to be testing out the styles of the page. And then we're going to be testing different layout options. And these will kind of help the product owner understand what it is that they're going to be receiving. All of this is to get value in the hands of the product owner. And that way they can see if this really represents their brand. We're going to be building some example pages. We're going to show the user experience that we're thinking about. And we're going to be setting up these A/B tests so that they can have different options that they can choose from. And the neat thing about this is that this branding conversation will continue through the rest of the project. But in iteration 1, we focus on it and we deliver that. And the other nice thing about it is that in order to deliver that during iteration 1, we're setting up the pipeline that we're going to be delivering the branding conversation and the options over the entire project. And so we're going to set that up using Git and Azure websites. And so you can see the path of totality across the Azure websites right here with the... All right, I can only use Eclipse jokes very rarely. It doesn't happen all that often. But so how many people are familiar with Git? All right, excellent, excellent. Yeah, we find that this is a great tool for software developers. It's also a great tool for designers. So what we are going to do is we're going to set up a Git repository. And here I have my good old Git command line. And right here is TARDIS wireframes. And here I just have some files that are the wireframes that my designers built in order to show what's happening. So let's go to a browser real quick. And we will just open the TARDIS wireframes. Go to the index. And so you can see here we are just talking with our product owner. Our product owner is kind of a strange person, but she's all right. She seems to change quite often, and she is looking for a way that she can use a database online to search for suitable companions because she likes to go on different adventures. So we're going to help her to build this system. And so our designers came up with a few branding options for her. So then they put together this menu here, and we just put that into HTML. So we've got our search page. So here we just fill out some stuff, and we're searching for the different people that we want to be companions. Let's take a look at some search results. That might be what that looks like. We'll have a dashboard with various information on it. You can do some configuration settings, etc. And we've got all of these different pages that we're trying out the branding on, and none of these pages actually do anything. They're just static HTML pages. And our designers have been working on the HTML, they've been working on the CSS, and they're checking this stuff into Git. And so here I've got a history of all of the changes that they've made over time, and I want to go ahead and deploy this somewhere that I don't have to use just a file in order to access it on my machine. I want the product owner to be able to access it. We want to deliver value to the product owner. So in order to do that, I'm going to go up to Azure, and the first thing that we want to do is to create a brand new resource group. So how many people have used Azure before? Got just one. Okay. A whole bunch of people I can introduce to Azure today. Okay, so Azure has a great way to organize all of the different resources. These resources are databases or websites or virtual machines, networks, just anything that you want to build in Azure. They've got a great way to organize them in groups so that you know what project they all belong to. And so here we're going to add a group that we call come on. I guess it's being a little bit finicky. Okay, add a resource group. There we go. Okay, so we're going to call this resource group TARDIS 2.0. And I wanted to choose where all of my resources go. No spaces. There we go. And so let's go ahead and keep all of these things local to the South Central US. Pin this to the dashboard, and now I can always get to that resource group. So that resource group is where I'm going to start spinning up different things that I want to then deploy to Azure. And for delivering the branding here in iteration 1, I want to create an Azure website. So we can see here is a web app. I'm sorry, they've changed the name over time. I'm used to the name website, but a web app is a way that we can deploy just static HTML or ASP.NET code or Node.js, a few other platforms and languages. Just deploy those as an app. Just get them out there. And so we're going to use this for the wireframes. So I'll call this TARDIS wireframes. And you can see here the rest of that says .azurewebsites.net. Let's see if I can zoom in on that, make it a little bit easier to see. So the app name is TARDIS wireframes, and the rest there, .azurewebsites.net, that gives us the URL that the product owner can use to access this web app. We're going to create it inside of the TARDIS 2.0 web application, or the resource group. And so, yeah, go ahead and create that. And so, just like that, we've got a place now where we can deploy an application. Now we have to choose how we're going to deploy it. So our deployment succeeded. Let me just scroll on back here to, well, come all the way out here, and we can see here's our resource group. And now it just has the TARDIS wireframes application in it. In order to decide how we're going to deploy to it, let's take a look at our deployment options. And we've got lots of different ways that we can deploy code to a web app. In this case, we've got a Git repository. So let me go ahead and take a look here. I can push that Git repository into GitHub. How many folks have GitHub accounts? Yeah, that's a great way to do open source. This one, not open source. I don't quite want to use GitHub for this one. We might use Visual Studio Team Services. That's going to be a good option. For this, though, I'm just going to create a local Git repository. And so that is going to give me just a repository I can push straight into Azure, and then it'll deploy those files as a web application. So let me hit OK on that. And if I go back to my overview, I can see right here is a git clone URL. That tells me if I just push to that remote, then it'll take care of the deployment for me. And right here is the URL for the application itself. So I'm going to give that URL to my product owner, and then she'll be able to see all of the great stuff that I'm building for her. So let me go ahead and copy that. Come out here. And you can see that, well, I've already set up an origin at that particular URL. So this is at tardiswireframes.git. So let me push origin Tulsa .NET User Group to master. And so this is going to take the code that my designers have already put together and the CSS that they've built, and just using these static resources, it's going to ship those up to Azure, and it's going to deploy those as a web application. So if I come back over here to deployment options, I can see right here is the actual deployment that just went up to Azure. And now if I go over here and I refresh, now the application is hosted up on Azure, and the product owner can get to it, and she can see, is this the branding that she wants? And so just that fast, we've set up a deployment pipeline that we can use for testing out branding ideas and doing A/B tests. We can say, well, try this interaction, try that interaction. What do you think about this layout versus that layout? And she can give us that immediate feedback, and we're delivering that value directly to the product owner. All right? So that's all well and good for getting the branding out there. Is this how you want to deploy your production code, though? No, not quite. For my own personal apps, sure. I'll do this for my blog. I'll do this for some test projects. But when it comes to deploying to production, I want to have more control than just simply pushing the source code out into a Git repository and having it automatically go up there. And so that's where we begin iteration 2, where we're delivering the sitemap. So the value that we're delivering with the sitemap is that we're testing out the navigation. We're actually navigating from one page to another rather than just looking at individual pages and their individual layout. We're testing out the interactions. So we're seeing that if I'm actually working with some data on this page, then when I interact with it, it's going to update the page in a certain way. It's going to aggregate that data in a certain way. And this is the first time that I'm deploying a real application. So before, we were just deploying static HTML, CSS, but now this is real code, and we're going to get this code running in a real application. And so in order to deliver the sitemap, I'm going to use visualstudio.com, that's Visual Studio Team Services, and we're going to deploy to an Azure virtual machine. So whereas before we were doing platform as a service, delivering to a web application, now we're doing infrastructure as a service. So we're deploying to just a box running IIS out there in the cloud. And we want to make sure that we deploy this repeatably, so we're not just going to push straight from Visual Studio into this virtual machine. No, we're going to set up some PowerShell scripts to do it. And so this is how we're going to start to deliver an actual application out to an Azure VM. So let's go back to, okay, here I am. Let's go back to my TARDIS 2.0 resource group. And I want to, first of all, spin up a virtual machine that I can start deploying things to. So let's go down to, well, I don't have to look for it. I can actually search for it. Virtual machine. So I should be able to find some let's see, this is going to be Windows Server. There we go. Windows Server. Let's do Windows Server 2016 Data Center. That'll work. So I'm going to go ahead and spin up a server. And now this is going to take a little bit longer for it to churn. We want to have here a cheat sheet that I'll be referring to for this part of it. So we want to give it a name. We'll call it TARDIS Web. The username that we'll use to sign on, mperry, we'll give it a nice password. And we will use our existing resource group, TARDIS 2.0. And we want to put that in South Central United States. Okay. So now in order to get that spun up, we have different options for the various sizes that we want to use. So I'm just going to go with the 3.5 gig. That'll be on average about $47 a month to run that virtual machine. You can get less expensive virtual machines, but this one will do nicely for our purposes there. Everything is good to go, so we just set that all up. Okay, so do you remember back in the days when you had to work with your networking team and you said, okay, we're going to build an application, so we're going to need 2 web servers, we're going to need a SQL cluster, and then they gathered all the requirements and had to name all the machines, and then after about 6 weeks, if you're really lucky and they're a really fast group, then you'll have something that's set up incorrectly that you can deploy to. And then you tell them everything that they got wrong and they have to go back and fix it. Well, here we only have to wait just a few minutes and we've got a new machine spun up. So the cloud definitely is making our lives easier. But this is just half of the picture. We're going to be deploying to this web application, but we're also going to be checking our code into VSTS. So let's go over there and set that up. So what you'll want to do is go out to visualstudio.com. That's not the IDE in the cloud. Visualstudio.com is TFS in the cloud. But everyone here raised their hand when they said they're using Git. Okay, not TFS version control. You can do that if you want to, but Git version control in TFS, which gives you your build system, it gives you your work items, it helps you to organize your projects, but you can still use Git version control. So that's what we're going to do. We are going to set up a brand new project. Let me make sure I don't already have it. I do. So yeah, in the interest of time, I will show you the project that I already have here, but I'll just set up a brand new build in that project. So I set up a project called TARDIS 2.0, and in this project, over here in code, I've already set up a repository called TARDIS 2.0, and it is a Git repository. So you can set up a TFS source code repository or a Git source code repository. So I've got the Git source code repository up there. And that repository is cloned right here. There we go. It's cloned right here, and I've got a branch Tulsa DNUG, so let me go ahead and push to origin Tulsa DNUG. So you can see before I just had the master branch, and there's the good old Dallas .NET User Group where I did this first. If I refresh now, you'll see that here we've got our Tulsa .NET User Group brand new branch up there. I want to build the code that's in this branch. So let me set that up. I'm just going to go to builds and releases. You can see I've got a few builds that I've already created. Let's go ahead and create a brand new build definition. Take this from step 0. This is going to be an ASP.NET application, and I'm building it straight out of a Visual Studio solution. So I've just Visual Studio, file new project, ASP.NET. So let's do an ASP.NET application. Apply that. So this will be Tulsa DNUG. There we go. And then we get to choose our build agent. So what does your build server need to have installed on it in order to be successful? In this case, we're going to use a hosted build agent, but we want to build using Visual Studio 2017, so hosted VS 2017. If you were doing a Node application, for example, you might do a hosted Linux build server, although I even do my Node builds on a hosted server as well. And so it's going to look for SLN files inside of the repository, and right now it's going to create an artifact called drop. We'll change that later. And so you can see here we've got which repository are we going to build from. So we're going to build from this project. We could also set up a build that pulls from GitHub, pulls from some other Git repository, even pulls from Subversion. Does anyone still use Subversion? It's okay, you don't have to raise your hand. But we're going to pull from the TARDIS 2.0 branch of this project, or the Tulsa DNUG branch of this project. And if we take a look at the triggers, what's going to trigger a build, I will enable continuous integration. And so that means that I want to start a build whenever somebody checks something into Tulsa DNUG. So this way I just give this to all of my developers and they just start working, they start pushing their code, and it's just going to automatically trigger some builds. It's coming really handy. All right, let's take a look at the rest of the tasks. Well, it's going to do a NuGet restore. Yeah, I'll probably have some NuGet packages in there. It'll do a build out of the solution folder. It'll run tests. So if I have any projects that have the word test in the project, it'll find those, it'll run those. So NUnit, MSUnit, XUnit, it'll find those tests and run them. It's going to publish some symbols and it's going to publish some artifacts. We're going to come back here and tweak this, publishing the artifacts a little bit, but for the most part, this default build is ready to go. It's all set up to take your code and start building it. So let's go ahead and save it, and we're going to queue up a brand new build. And so now the build has been queued, and we can actually take a look at the build as it happens. So it'll show us it's waiting for a build agent. Yes?
A lot of this is meaning, so
Mm-hmm.
forgive this kind of dumb question. That build, is that running in the cloud somewhere?
Yes, that build is running in the cloud.
That's in the team services.
Yes, in Visual Studio Team Services, exactly. Yes, if you want to run the build locally, there is a way that you can install a build agent locally and then configure it so that VSTS can kick off a local build. That's a little bit more complicated. So if you have any special steps that need to be run, but for the most part, the sorts of things you'll need to do in a build, the hosted build agent can do that. Yep, excellent question. Let's see if this can. All right. All right, you saved somebody from a serious head injury there. Okay, so we can see all of the build steps happening. It's already grabbed all the source code. It's downloaded all the NuGet packages. It has run the build. It's run the tests. In this case, there weren't any tests. Bad me. But then it's got the builds. Yes, here it's showing the build status. But it has the build artifacts right here. So we told it to create a folder called drop, and part of that was to put the output of the build into that drop folder. So we've got a few things that were just automatically created for us. We're going to go through some of these artifacts and see how we're going to deploy these to a virtual machine. But it's all packaged up for us, all right there in a folder. We could just download that and we'll have all of these build artifacts. Comes in really handy. I'm sorry? Yeah, so what? It is actually possible, yes, to use PowerShell to script out all of the stuff that we're doing. What I typically do is I'll set up the build myself because that's a one-time thing. But for a previous project, we actually did have a PowerShell script that spun up a virtual machine and then deployed to the virtual machine, ran all the integration tests on that virtual machine. It ran them in a loop so that it captured some performance data out of that, and then downloaded that performance data as a big CSV file, and then shut the whole thing down. So you just ran one PowerShell command and then wait 3 hours, and when you're done, you've got one file that you can deliver to the product owner to say, look, we have improved performance of the system by 5%. So that was that particular project. It was definitely a performance project, and we wanted to show that as our continuous value. Yeah, but in this case, we are going to be delivering this application itself as the continuous value. So if we take a look now at Azure, we'll see the virtual machine has started. It's running for us. It's all ready. And there are a few things that have already been set up for us. And most importantly, what's been set up for us is remote access. So we can already use RDS in order to log into this box and get things set up a little bit more. So let us go and set that machine up a little bit more. If we take a look right, let's see, where did it go? I always forget where this is, but how do I remote? Okay, well, we'll just set this up manually. So there is a way. Maybe it's connect. Maybe it's connect. I think it might be connect. Yeah, here it is. Yeah, you just hit the connect button and it downloads an RDP file. And now you can just open up this RDP file, type in that password that we set up right at the beginning. Oh, I don't want to use my Microsoft account for that. I want to use the username that I set up at the beginning. There we go. Now I can RDP into that brand new virtual machine. Never been used before. So all that's running. But when I deploy my software to this machine, I don't want to RDP into it. I don't want to have to log in and use the desktop every time. I want to use PowerShell. So let me grab a little file out of an open source project that I've published on GitHub. I'm going to share the address with you, called Push. And this project has a little helper called Enable PSH Remoting. So this script will turn on PowerShell remoting on a brand new virtual machine. So I'm just going to copy this script. We'll go up here to this brand new virtual machine. Don't need that guy. Paste that in there. And now we want to run PowerShell. You can do it. There it is. PowerShell as an administrator. Because if you're going to run PowerShell, why not, right? So I've got my Enable PSH Remoting on the desktop. So I'll just change to desktop. And I'll run Enable PSH Remoting. So what is this thing going to do? So first of all, I need to tell it what is the, oh, I can't zoom in because I'm inside the VM. There we go. There, now I can zoom in. First, I need to tell it what is the publicly addressable name of this machine. What is it going to be called from the outside? Oh, I happen to have that. That's right here. That's this public IP address. So I'm going to copy that in. So there's that name. And it's going to use that name in order to create a self-signed certificate. And then it's going to use that self-signed certificate in order to open PowerShell remoting over a secure port. And then now I can remote into that machine just using the command line. I don't have to go in through the keyboard and screen RDP connection anymore. So that's all set up for me. And so now I want to go in through PowerShell and deploy some software to that thing. And so in order to do that, I am going to use the rest of this this push project. And so this has a PowerShell module that I need to install. Let me hop to a PowerShell command line from my local box. And here I am in the TARDIS 2.0 application. And first of all, let me go ahead and show you how to install push. It's pretty simple. We'll go into push. We'll run install.ps1. So when you pull this source code down from GitHub, then you'll just be able to run that install script. And then it gives you some instructions, and it says, okay, you need to run register vsts. So now let's go over to my TARDIS 2.0 application and run register vsts. So the first thing that I need to set up is the connection to the VSTS project that I just set up. So this is the project where I've just configured the build. So I need to give it the name of the team, so it's going to be whatever.visualstudio.com. So that whatever part, in my case, is Michael L. Perry, because that's what I signed up for way back at the beginning. So we will do register VSTS with the team name, MICHAELLPERY. Okay, so that's step one. Then the next is you need to create a personal access token. So it needs to know to connect to VSTS in order to pull things down. So let's create a personal access token by going to this URL right here. So I am already logged in to michaellperry.visualstudio.com, so that means I can add an access token for TARDIS 2.0, and you can tell it specifically what you want this personal access token to grant the system to do. In this case, I'm going to just say all scopes, but we want this to be able to download the build artifacts, to list the builds, to do all the things related to builds. So we can figure out what those checkboxes would be. But for right now, I'm just going to give it all scopes. And so here is the personal access token. So everyone be sure to write that down. This will be your last chance. I'm just going to paste that in. You can see it right there on the screen. Oh no. Okay, let's try that again. Register, paste it in. Wow, there must be some kind of special character in there. That hasn't happened before. All right, copy that. Let's just see what that looks like. Not sure why that would be causing trouble. Okay. Paste it in. Okay, well, we get to see the other way that we can set things up. Because what this is actually doing is it's using Credential Manager in order to save my credentials in a way that is secure. If I take a look at what it's done so far, I can see this file called vstsconfig that it's been creating. And so here it's captured the fact that my team name is Michael L. Perry. So it's capturing all that information there. But I don't want it to store my access token in just a flat file. So instead, I'm going to go out to the Credential Manager. And this is a way that I can create secure credentials just right here on my box. So I will add a generic credential to michaellperry.visualstudio.com. studio.com. The username will just be Michael L. Perry, and then the password will be that user access token. So that is stored securely on my box, and I can no longer just read it from the user interface, but the PowerShell script can pull it up. And so now when I run register again, you can see, hey, look, I'm able to connect to michaellperry.visualstudio.com, and I can see you've got all these projects out there. Wow, how did that happen? Let's take a quick look here, quick aside, and look at Telerik, looking at the web, Fiddler. Okay, let's run that again and see what happens. So I run that again, and I can see here we've got a call out to michaellperry.visualstudio.com, and we're accessing the API for VSTS. And this API is pulling back a bunch of JSON, and you can see that each one of these values, each one of these 19 values, is a project that I've set up on VSTS. So we have a full API that we can use from PowerShell just by making web service requests in order to list these things out. And so that's what this script is doing. It's listing those out. And I can say, okay, I want the project name TARDIS 2.0. So I pull in that project name, and now it looks out there and it sees, using another API call, that, okay, you've got these different build definitions ready. So we've already set up the TARDIS 2.0 Tulsa DNUG build definition. So let me copy that, and I'll register VSTS, and I'll specify build definition name, paste that in, and so we have now configured this script to be able to go out to the build definition that we just set up and find all of the builds and all the build artifacts. And now we can start to deploy them. So our next step is going to register an environment to which to deploy those. All right, so that's a lot of steps to go through. Let me summarize real quickly what we just talked about. So we just went over the VSTS REST API and how we can access that just running some PowerShell scripts. So it starts with the that first URL that you see there. We're just going after the default collection, and that TARDIS 2.0, that's the project name that we've chosen there. And then we can list out the build definitions. So we chose that build definition that we want to go after. Once we have that build definition, we can list the builds for that build definition. And once we have the build that we're interested in, we can list the artifacts. And that gives us an actual download URL that we can then deploy. Let's list out those builds. So I should be able to get builds and ignore the error for a little bit. We're about to fix that anyway. But you can see that it is it's going out there using that REST API and listing the builds that have completed. So you can see the build that completed just a little bit earlier. We've got a successful build, and we've got that build number. Now we can refer to that in order to push that build. But we need to set up an environment to which to push it. So let's do that by doing register environment. And here we have to give it the environment name. So we're going to push to dev. So register environment dev. Oh no. And PowerShell fail. What's that? Engine. Oh, yeah. Okay, that's not going to work. Thank you. Register environment dev. Okay, there we go. So we have to specify the web server name. So the web server name, that is, let's go back to our web server here. That's this public IP address. Paste that in. And now it's going to need to be able to log into that web server. That's okay. I've set up some credentials, so let's go ahead and type those in. And now where do you think it's going to store these credentials? In an XML file? No. No, of course not. The Windows Credential Manager. So it'll, let's see, the Credential Manager, there it is. So if I take a look at my Windows credentials, then yes, you can see a couple of servers that I set up in the past. I'll refresh this page, and now you can see there's the third IP address, so the one that I just set up now. It's got those Windows credentials stored in a nice secure place. So how many people have set up an XML rewrite rule? Like you've got your web.config, so then you've got your web.dev.config. You've done that. And then one for test and one for production, maybe. And so now anybody who's got access to your source code can actually look that up. Oh, look, there is the credentials for the production database. That's probably not what you want to do. Instead, if you were to store those credentials securely on the machine of just the person who's going to deploy it, then you're controlling those credentials a little bit better. And so that's what we're doing here by using the credential manager. Since I'm deploying to dev, have the dev credentials, but I'll never have production credentials. That's somebody else's job. So I need to be able to now set up a SQL Server name so that I can then hook that SQL Server connection string into the web config file in order to deploy it. So let's go ahead and set up a, where's my virtual machine? Oh, there's my virtual machine. We'll back out to my resource group. So far we've set up the TARDIS wireframes, we've set up the virtual machine, and all of this stuff came with it. We've got the virtual machine, we've got the storage account, the virtual network, we've got a network interface, an IP address. All of that stuff was all collected within the resource group. If I hadn't used resource groups to create this, then all of that stuff would just be all over my account, and it would be hard to know which one goes with which. But now it's all in one place. Good stuff. So let's go ahead and add a SQL database. And this way we'll have that that database that we can start to deploy to as well. So set that up. And so here is my little cheat sheet. I want this to be called TARDIS DB. So there's TARDIS DB. Yep, that name is available. Put that inside of a new server, which we will call TARDIS SQL. And we will give it the admin logon of mperry and the nice secure password of Fourth Doctor. Who here is a Fourth Doctor guy? All right, maybe I'm the old guy. I don't know. So that will set up my SQL database on a brand new SQL server, and that's going to be inside of the same TARDIS 2.0 resource group. So keep all of that stuff all in one place. So it's setting that all up. But now I've got those credentials that I can start to configure. So here is the full name of my SQL server. So I'll register environment dev with the SQL server name, TARDIS SQL database.windows.net, and then I give it the username mperry and the super secret SA password. That is weird how it's doing that every time. mperry 4th Doctor. Okay. And then finally it needs to know the name of the database. So let me register environment dev database name. Thank you. Dev database name, and that database name was TARDIS DB. All right, so I've got that environment registered, and if I take a look at my files now, I can see there's the VSTS config that we set up before, and here's an environments config now. I will list out the environments config, and we can see that's got the name of the environment, the web server, the SQL server, the database, not the credentials to log on to the database. Those are stored in the credential manager. But now all of that is configured so that this script can just simply say, okay, I want to download this package and then deploy it to that server. Let's go ahead and give that a try. It's not going to quite work yet. There's one more step we need to do, but let's just give it a try. So if I do a get builds, then we can see, okay, here are the builds that you can deploy. You can do a push build to dev, that build number, cross your fingers and see if that works. So we'll just run that command, and a whole bunch of things go wrong. Okay, so they went wrong a little bit earlier than I expected them to. But the thing that it's looking for at this point is it's going to download the build package that we just created on VSTS. So let's go back to VSTS. We can see here's our build package. It's called drop, and it's got a whole bunch of files in it, and then it's going to try to run web deploy on that build package. Well, we haven't configured this project yet to do a web deploy. So how do we get that all set up? What we want to do is create a web deploy package inside of our project. And so how many people have used web deploy from Visual Studio to just push out to IIS? Yeah, a few people. And so that's fun to do once or twice, but you don't want to do all of your deployments directly from Visual Studio. So what you can do instead is to create a web deploy package inside of Visual Studio, and then that package is a zip file that you can then deploy later. And so that's what we're doing here. So let's go back to our project. And this will open an ASP.NET web application that we want to deploy. So this is the web application that we're building during iteration 2, starting to put together that sitemap, and we want to get that deployed out to, we're going to talk about that later, get that deployed out to our virtual machine. And so we've got here, oh, we do have a test project. Yeah, just the tests that were generated for us. They're not very good tests. That's okay. But that's where the test project, that's where the tests would go. And it would run the tests anytime somebody checked in because we told it to do continuous integration, and running the tests were part of the build. But if we come up here to the web project itself and go to publish, then we can set up a publish profile. So so here we can create a brand new profile. You can see I've already got a custom profile set up, but what we would do is create a brand new profile, and this is going to be deploying to IaaS, not to an Azure app service, because app services, that was the first thing that we demonstrated. Here we're going to deploy just to regular old IaaS. So this could be in the cloud, it could be on premises, could be Azure, could be AWS. It's just IaaS. So we're going to set that up as the target. The publish method, we could do web deploy, and that would go straight out to IaaS right now, or we could do web deploy package, and that's going to set up that package for us to deploy right here. So I've set up a there we go. I've set up a location called deployment files. Oh wait, that wasn't it. Packages, yeah. Nope, that was my NuGet packages. Well, let's just see what I'd set up here. So here's my custom profile. We can see it's going to a package location called deploy/tardis.zip, and then the site name that I've chosen is just the default website. So this is just going straight out to IaaS, just the default route of IaaS. So we set up that deployment package, and so that is set up to run on build. And so that's why when we did the build, we ended up with right here. Oh yeah, these artifacts. That's why we ended up with, inside of that drops folder, a file called tardis.zip. So that was our web deploy package. And so inside of that package is all of the binaries that were compiled. It's all of the web pages that are part of that build. The problem is that it's just not configured exactly the right way. So we've got our custom profile, we've got that all set to go, and then what we want to do is to give that a different name. Let me go back to my builds, and we can see here's a different build definition. So for this one, rather than drops, we call that web deployment package. So we're taking the we want to take the deployment package from the published websites. Now this is something that Visual Studio will just set up for you automatically, is it will copy all of your deployment packages outputs to published websites. So we want to just take published websites, our TARDIS package, and then copy that out as our web deployment package. So let's do that real quick. Come on back to our Tulsa NET NUG. And so far things haven't gone horribly wrong. Just alright, so we're going to take that path, and then we are going to change the artifact name. Let's see, why are you... Well, let's see, let's go ahead and add a publish task. There we go. Copy that. That should be web deploy package. There we go. So now we can take this one and disable it. Don't need that. We just need the web deploy package. So save that, queue it up. And so that'll give us a build that now has the web deploy package that our script is going to download and then configure with the SQL connection credentials that we've stored in our credential manager, and then push that out to the virtual machine. If that all goes according to plan. Let's just see. Oh, yes. Should have been looking at my notes because there's one other step that I forgot to do, and that is to actually enable web deploy on the target machine. Fortunately, there's a script for that. So if I take a look at my helper here, I can enable web server features. This comes in really handy. So let's turn those on. So we've got IIS deployed out there. We've opened up, we've enabled PowerShell remoting, so we've opened a port through the firewall. Actually, there is a second firewall that we need to open the port through, and so that's what these red messages are telling me, is that I've gone to the machine and opened up a few ports on its firewall, but here in Azure, we've got, in fact, let me go back to the network interface. This network interface here has some security rules. So we can see that it is not configured to allow connections for WinRM. So that means that we need to add IP configuration and oops. Yes, sorry. So this is this is the virtual machine, but from the Azure portal. So the machine itself is all configured, but the virtual network that the Azure has set up for that machine is locked down. So right now it's only allowing remote RDP into that machine. So we need to set up a security rule for it. And I want to go to the TARDIS Web NSG. There we go. Yeah, the network security group. Go into the network security group and create an inbound security rule. There we go. So we can see that right now it's got an inbound security rule to allow RDP, but nothing else. So now we add something for WinRM. So the service, we will choose WinRM as our service. And you can see that's going to go in port 5986. That's the secure port for remote PowerShell. Go ahead and allow that. And once that's set up, now I should be able to make remote PowerShell connections to that virtual machine. So let's try that out now with enable web server features. And so there we go. Now it is making that remote PowerShell connection to that virtual machine, and it is it's turning on IIS with ASP.NET support, .NET 4.5. It is enabling web deploy, and it's going to do all of that through Chocolatey. How many people are familiar with Chocolatey? A little bit? Okay, Chocolatey is something truly amazing. So we're all familiar with NuGet, right? So NuGet is how I can take software packages that I want to use within my applications, and I can add them as dependencies within my app. But what if I wanted to do the same thing with services, with applications? You know, what if I wanted to install web deploy on a machine? Well, if I were to have a NuGet package that contained web deploy and all of the scripts to set it up, then maybe I could use NuGet to deploy infrastructure stuff. And that's exactly what Chocolatey is. So this is using a Chocolatey package, which is really just a NuGet package, but something that I use at runtime, not at compile time. And it's something that then I can deploy to my servers with just a single command. And so this is going out there to my server saying, okay, you use Chocolatey to download this package, run the script, and then it's going to set up web deploy. And so now we've got a hands-off installation of web deploy. Once I've got web deploy on there, then I can use these scripts to then deploy an actual web application to that machine. While that is going, the next step, going back to my cheat sheet here, so we've set up our web deploy package in our project. It's called tardis.zip, and it's in the deploy folder. Okay, so that build should be finished now. Let's go back over here to my builds. And here I have, oh, this build failed. What happened here? Okay, the publish artifact web deploy package that did not find the TARDIS package. Okay, so, well, at this point, then I would be able to say, okay, I want to download this build. It will rewrite the web config with the information that I have registered, and then upload that and get that running on the machine. So at this point, I could say you could say that things have gone horribly, horribly wrong, but that's what you get for trying to do it all live. So I might spend a little bit of time later trying to get that all figured out, see what happened there. But let's kind of do an overview of the different commands that it took in order to make all of this work. So the first thing was that we used the Windows Credential Manager in order to store our credentials. There's a PowerShell command. You have to install a PowerShell module to get it, but it's get stored credential. And then you can just say, you know, I want to grab that credential, use that in order to then remote into a machine. And we would use that fourth one there, the new PS session, in order to do that remoting into that new machine. So then it creates a PowerShell session. With that session, you can copy files to the target machine, and you can invoke commands on that target machine, and that's that fifth one there, invoke command. So it's just take these PowerShell commands, run them over there. In order to use the REST API for VSTS, we're just calling invoke REST method, and we're grabbing all of that JSON and just parsing that and displaying that to the user. when we download the build artifact, that's a zip file. So we just call extract to directory. That's not a special PowerShell command. That's just a .NET class. It's part of the framework. From PowerShell, you can access anything that's in the .NET framework. I can't tell you how many times I've Googled, well, how do I do this with PowerShell? Well, you know how to do that with .NET. That's how you do it with PowerShell. So you can just access those same .NET classes you're used to and use them inside of PowerShell. And so with just these commands, I was able to put together a script that does all of that deployment. So that was how we got to the second iteration up and running, where we were able to deliver an application to a virtual machine and have it running. And so the third aspect of that was to do the actual information architecture. So going back to my product owner, she's traveling all over the place with some companions, and she goes on various adventures. So we wanted to start to analyze that information, see, okay, is this the way the information should be structured? We've got our companion table, then we've got our adventures table, and so an adventure has a companion. So that's the companion that went with you on that adventure. And so it's like, yeah, okay, that's looking about right. So in order to test this information architecture, we wanted to start to build the application around it. And we wanted the pages to actually start to save data into this table structure, read the data back from the table structure, and start to actually build out the application on top of these tables. And so in order to deliver this information architecture, we wanted to use Entity Framework and deploy to SQL Server. But this is SQL Server in Azure, so it's SQL in the cloud. So the way that we set that up is right here is our data access layer. And so you can see we've got a place where we can start to put together our data context. So how many folks have used Entity Framework? Okay, excellent. Got a few. All right, so our DB context, this is where we set up the different tables that we're going to be using. So here I've created a table for the companions, another table for the adventures, and I just simply say a companion is something that has a companion ID, a name, and an age. And then an adventure is something that has an adventure ID, the time of the adventure, and then some reference to our companion. And so we gave it the companion object itself and the companion ID. Yes? Oh, yeah, just F12. Yeah. So, so by setting up the companion and the companion ID, then by convention, Entity Framework set up a foreign key for me. And then I'm able to create these migrations. So here is a migration that creates my adventure table with my foreign key to companions. Here's the migration that created the companions table. So, okay, great. I can set up these migrations, but I don't really want to set up the migrations myself. I want the system to do it for me. So I'm going to tell the system to add a brand new migration based on the information architecture that I create. Let's take a look here. This is the nothing up my sleeve moment, so I don't yet have a database deployed on my local machine. Let me go ahead and build this. Then I'll go to the Package Manager console. This is the same place where you can install NuGet packages. And I want to run all of these migrations to set up a database on my local machine so I can do some testing. So I want the startup project to be the web application. So you can see that's in bold. I've selected to set this as the startup project somewhere in here. There it is, set as startup project. But then right here, the default project, I want that to be my data access layer. And now I can say update database. And that is going to run all of my migrations against the database that is configured in the web config of this project right here. So that web config, right there, default connection is just local DB. And so you can see here it's run these two migrations to add the companion table, to add the adventure table. And now if I refresh, then we'll see a TARDIS database show up in here. So refresh. And so here is my TARDIS database. And it has my adventures and my companions. And you can see that it's got the foreign key relationship. So let's show the create statement for that table. You can see here is that foreign key to the adventures. This is the primary key adventures, and it's got the foreign key to the companion. The foreign key setup right there. So that's all great, but then we start to work with the application a little bit, and we find, wait, this information architecture isn't quite right. Some adventures that she goes on, she has multiple companions that she takes with her. So we needed to change things up a bit. So we go into the data access layer, and we've got our adventure right here. So instead of one companion, we're going to have a collection of companions. So there's my companions. I don't have one companion ID anymore. I've got this collection of companion IDs. And so companion no longer, okay, yeah. So now I've made a change to my model, and I want to make that similar change to the database. So I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to add a migration. And I'll call it multiple companions. So I just type in add migration, multiple companions. And so all of that code that we saw inside of the migrations that set up the tables, this is how that code was generated. So this is the instructions to drop that foreign key from adventure to companion ID, drop that column, and now here I'm going to create a brand new foreign key called Companion's Adventure ID. This isn't quite what I'm after. So we need to configure this, and we need to set up that many-to-many relationship. So it's trying to add a companions column to adventure, and that's not quite right. So we can go in here, we can delete that migration because we haven't run it anywhere. And now let's go ahead and configure this. So we can override a method called onModelCreating. And this is where I can configure for my model builder. I've got an entity called adventure, and this has many companions. And then the other side would be a with many. And then this would set up a many-to-many relationship. So by setting it up this way, I don't have any way from the companion side to list all of the adventures. Let's go ahead and set that up. That might be useful. So companion, let's say I've got a public collection of adventure. So there's my collection. And now I can say adventures. Okay, so now I've got this many-to-many relationship. The companion has many adventures. Adventure has many companions. Well, let's see if that gives me what I want. So now I'll add the migration. And now we can see, okay, this is looking a little bit better. It's creating an intermediate table, adventure companions, that has an adventure ID and a companion ID, and it's got foreign keys to both of those two tables. So this is giving me that many-to-many relationship that I'm looking for. So now that it's doing what I want, I will update database. And this is going to execute that migration on my local machine. And that's great. I can start to develop against it. I can start to test it. But then I want to get that out to the application. I want to get that out to the cloud. And so I need to be able to run these migrations on the cloud. So in order to do that, we've got this one little step here that we can add to our deployment script, where we're going to run migrate.exe. That's a tool that comes with Entity Framework that runs our migrations on our target machine. And so if we had the deployment working, I'd be able to show you that here it's able to run migrate.exe on the target machine and deploy changes to the database. And so here in iteration 3, we're actually testing the information architecture by delivering new versions of the database through Entity Framework migrations. And we're able to script that all through PowerShell so that anybody who needs to deploy a new version can just come into PowerShell and say, deploy this version to that environment. So that deploys the application, deploys the database, and then the product owner can test it all out. So we went through these 5 different PowerShell commands. All of the you can see all of the source code that I went through up on a GitHub site or a GitHub repository that I'm about to share with you. And so we were able to use excuse me. We were able to use websites in order to deliver the wireframes and test out the branding. And then we used VSTS in order to keep track of the production source code and to configure all the builds. And then through PowerShell, we could deploy those build artifacts out to a virtual machine. And then using Entity Framework, we were able to create migrations and deploy new versions of the database out to SQL Azure. And so using all of these tools together, both from the development side and the deployment side, we're able to continuously deliver that value out to our product owner. So you can grab all of the source code that we went over on my GitHub repository here, Michael L. Perry, and then it's /push. That's PSH is in PowerShell, but doing push with PowerShell. And ask me any questions that you want on Twitter, Michael L. Perry, or via email. And I definitely thank you very much.
Copy build artifacts. Wait, no. Build solution.